welcome back to another episode of Pinpoint Weather University. Of course, you recognize to my right, meteorologist Brandon Lawson. He's the one who's usually doing many of these episodes, but hey, I wanted to come in, do a little shadowing here at Pinpoint Weather University. And also for today's episode, Brandon, we're talking about something you got a little bit of a passion for. It's a little bit of betting here, but not betting on sports, Brandon. We're actually going to be doing talking about betting on the weather here. I came across a really interesting article. It was on at the website Atmos, and it was called The Climate Casino Inside the Markets Betting on Our Planet's Future. And it was the author is Dr. Hallie Lieberman, and that's who we have here as our guest today on Pinpoint Weather University. Dr. Lieberman, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us about your article today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I've never spoken about weather before
Yeah.
on any interview. So this is fun.
Yeah, because as I go on your website here, it's your bio is journalist, sex historian, and junk food enthusiast. So I guess jumping in here, what kind of drew you to the idea of, prediction markets in general, and then the subset of when it comes to weather betting in particular?
Well, I personally like prediction markets, so I do have a Kalshi account. I don't bet a lot, but I do enjoy like putting a couple dollars on the Steelers or some other, thing. I am a Steelers fan. I know you're from Philadelphia, so you're probably an Eagles fan, and we can talk about that later. But so that's how I got into it. Like I was like, oh, let's see what else you can bet on here. And I was like, wait, what? The weather, like people are doing this. And I thought, well, maybe they're just betting like 2000, the total bets are just low, nothing compared to sports betting. And people were betting huge amounts, hundreds of thousands. It's actually millions of dollars when I did the interview with Kalshi. I was floored by how much was being spent on the weather and climate change and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's a really fascinating thing is, and when you started wanting to do an article and research about this, how did you go about sort of finding people that are first off, that they're betting specifically on the weather and that really want to talk about their experience? Gambling is one thing and people can feel certain ways about it, but when you talk about what the high temperature in Denver is going to be today, what the high temperature is going to be in Philadelphia, kind of what really brought how did you really find those people to interview?
So yeah, that's a good question. It was like hard to find them, but I went to one of my favorite interview sources, which is Reddit. And there's a Kalshi subreddit, and there were a few, not a lot, but there are a few people being like, man, like, how can I get the details on the weather? Oh, there's like a, station in Central Park. I'm gonna go visit there and see if I can get the numbers before like this was for daily high and temperature in Central Park or in New York City. So there were all these people sort of like really taking this seriously and also in Kalshi's Discord. So that's where I found people really like passionate about this.
Yeah, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of passionate people when it comes to the weather. And one of the interesting things is how did you what were some of the biggest areas when it came to people betting on the weather? What were some of the things they were most passionate about? The high temperature. Some of the people were talking about the EU climate goals and whatnot, and that was being bet on as well. What were sort of the biggest focuses in terms of where a lot of the action was going per se?
It was fascinating to me that people were betting on EU climate goals, but the people who are really passionate, it seemed so like almost obscure. It would be people betting on the high temperatures and they would choose a particular city. So a lot of people had Miami for whatever reason.
Interesting.
I think those temperatures were like don't fluctuate as much as like Denver and other cities. So they would have that's their city. Some were creating models, their own models to figure out what the temperature would be and how incorrect maybe some of the predictions had be or just figuring it out themselves how to predict this and it was crazy because it got down to if there's like a 1 degree, you're betting on, either 71 or 72 degrees.
Yep.
If you get like, you put $10,000 on 72 degrees and that you're 1 degree off, like you are screwed. So this was heated. They're trying to
Man.
find the edge everywhere. They're reaching out to like the mesonets at different universities trying to get the edge. And these scientists are like, why am I getting like hundreds of emails from strangers asking me for like details about this when in the past, I never heard from people like, why do people suddenly care about my data? So it created this whole kind of like network of, and then there's the ethical issues with that as well, of course.
I've always been passionate about sports in general. Like I'm a big Panthers fan, big NASCAR guy as well, and I started betting on sports probably about I'd say 10 years ago, maybe even a little less than that. But it made me more
Were you old
passionate.
enough to do that,
Yeah,
Brandon?
I was old. I was old. I'm not that young. I'm not that young or that old or that young, however. But anyway, one thing about sports betting, when you do it, it makes you more passionate about a game. Like there'll be a Monday Night Football game that I might not care about at all, but if I've got like a few dollars on it, I'm gonna put a little bit more focus into that game. Or like a NASCAR driver, I might bet on a NASCAR driver. I'm gonna put a little bit more focus on that driver if I have money on them. Do you think this is making people a little bit more knowledgeable about weather in general? I'm seeing like where some people are like, oh, there may be a severe thunderstorm warning. How's that going to impact the temperature? Do you think that's made people a little bit more knowledgeable about weather and climate in general?
Yes, they've absolutely are more knowledgeable about weather. And that's what the people I interviewed said. And that's what the experts I interviewed said. Like, so high temperature is, just seems like a gamified, like fun thing. But people were actually like who'd been doing this for years saw like, okay, wow, the high temperatures are really increasing, or wow, people betting on climate change, seeing sea levels really are rising. And when you're betting, and this is what like the research found, like when you're betting on it, when you have money on the line, and you're right, like when I bet just like $2 on the Steelers, I like suddenly care, or how many, yards Aaron Rodgers is going to pass for or whatever. He's probably not going to be the quarterback next year, hopefully. Um, but anyway, that's different. But when you're betting, you suddenly are, I suddenly are engaged in whatever you're doing in a way that you wouldn't be before. And so research shows, I interviewed a researcher who said like people actually who are betting on climate change actually start to shift their views. A small percentage of people, or
Wow.
a small percentage of shift, but actually start being more concerned about climate change and acting differently because they see, since they're putting money on it, they're only going to do it based on data. And like, if you have a belief that climate change isn't real, but the data is showing you something else, you are going to actually put your money on that something else. And then your mind is going to shift and say, well, maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe climate change is happening. Maybe I do need to do this to help the environment. So that was a fascinating part
Interesting.
to me.
No, that is
Yeah.
that is really interesting. That aspect I didn't even really think about there,
Mhm.
Brandon. But we're going to be continuing more about this conversation about the climate casino and just kind of the intricacies of betting on the weather and the future of our climate here. We're talking with Dr. Hallie Lieberman. We'll be talking more about this subject coming up in just a couple of minutes here on Pinpoint Weather University. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman, along with, of course, my great colleague here, meteorologist Brandon Lawson. We're talking about the climate casino, specifically the business of weather betting here. And we have a great guest with us today, Dr. Hallie Lieberman. She wrote an article, again, called The Climate Casino, Inside the Markets Betting on Our Planet's Future. And we were talking about some really interesting things here, Brandon, going into this
Yeah.
last break here about it kind of can impact people's views about how they view climate change and when they start putting money on maybe certain bad things potentially happening.
Yeah, when it comes to like weather forecasting for us, Andrew, we forecast severe weather, winter storms, different things like that. Well, we want to be right, but in some aspects, we don't want to be right, right? When it comes down to severe weather, the severe weather that we've already had during the month of March, it didn't get to the peak potential here in the Carolinas that we thought it could reach, but we're not necessarily sad about that.
Yeah.
More homes are standing after a cold front than what could have been if the Mother Nature was more significant. And we were talking about how you can bet on certain things with Kalshi when it comes down to like, there was one question on there. It's, do you think Japan will see an 8.0 magnitude earthquake before a certain year? Or do you think that a hurricane is going to make landfall in South Carolina that year? So just talk, Dr. Lieberman, about some of those questions and what people's reaction to that is. Because obviously, if you bet that, you're going to win money. But there's people that are like, I really don't want that to happen. I'm just going off the research.
Right. So what was really interesting when interviewing people for this is some people had a line like ethically, they're like, I am not going to bet on hurricanes because there's something that seems icky and creepy about making money off of this destruction that is like killing people or destroying property, destroying homes, like all the horrible things that can happen. There were other people I talked to who were like, well, yeah, like it is, a little icky, but I'm fascinated by predicting whether something's going to be a Cat 5 hurricane or a Cat 4. And I love looking at these models and I geek out on them. And so I can justify it. But I think there is something a little like, I was just looking on Kalshi today and like people are betting on how many measles cases are going to happen. And yeah, and so that's like another like icky thing. So people did have ethical lines. Some people were drawing them in different places. Because I think betting on high temperatures, nothing ethically weird about that. Betting on whether like the earth is going to be destroyed by, climate change is kind of, there's something that doesn't sound too like if you're right, like your family's going to be dead in 300 years or what. I don't know. It just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. I was just thinking too, Andrew, like, I mean, it's like we don't bet a player to get injured.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
That's probably. Well, I wouldn't be surprised the way these prediction markets are going.
Yeah.
Here, one of them, famously 2 or 3 weeks ago on Kalshi was about what was going to happen to the supreme leader of Iran, and there was a bit of a controversy because
Yeah.
if it they all of a sudden there was a little bit of debate here whether or not they did a rug pull because everyone assumed that if he was killed by the United States or Israel that would count as him being out as supreme leader, but apparently they did the terms and conditions where
Mhm.
anyone who is killed or dies, that doesn't count as being removed. So there's kind of like these little
Interesting.
intricacies in people, and it's something that's another subset of these prediction markets about kind of where is the ethical line on what you're allowed
Right.
to bet on, Dr. Lieberman. So that's kind of piggybacking off of what you're referencing there. And one thing here, I was looking in your article and some of the biggest numbers when it came to weather betting, and this kind of also parlays into some of the cuts that we've seen a little bit with the National Weather Service. One of the traders you talked to, Scott Owens, you said moves between $150,000 and $200,000 across multiple markets. Said the cuts might impact his strategy. Kind of a two-parter here. First, um, was that $150,000 in just prediction markets, or like are we talking about like the CME or the New York Stock Exchange basically when it comes to like oil futures or something like that?
No, that was just Kalshi. That was just it may have been Polymarket too, but it was just
Wow.
prediction markets.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. So then also, how many people when you were talking to them? Because so much of the stuff here, when it comes to the high temperature, it purely is you have to make sure you got the right airport because sometimes many of this stuff is done at the airport. If
Yeah.
you have the wrong airport, where they do the official ASOS data every single day, you can be off by that 1 degree that you were talking about. But how has the some of the National Weather Service cuts impacted those traders and their strategies and what you were talking about and how they, deploy their capital?
Yeah, well, so some people I talked about were very concerned with the fact that like they're cuts to National Weather Service and that this means the data is not reliable anymore. And then so one person I talked to was like, so now instead of saying like I'm really betting on what the high temperature is, they're like, now I'm betting on maybe what the National Weather Service is claiming the high temperature is, and are they going to claim it's lower or things like that. And because of then politics, I mean, politics gets into everything, but politics really gets into it when maybe the government isn't saying climate change is real or is trying to skew the data. There's became a lack of trust in the information the National Weather Service was giving, and traders were unsure what how far they should go into changing their bets based on not no longer trusting the numbers, which was kind of disturbing.
And Dr. Lieberman, just kind of bouncing off of that, what are some of the limits with this? You know, like I mean, if I bet there's going to be a wildfire in California, I can just go set one,
Yeah.
and you know, you get your money. So, are there any sort of limits to that Kalshi puts on that you can't bet on certain things when it comes to weather and climate?
Yes, Calci, and because it is like government regulated, and they said also ethically, you're not allowed to bet on wildfires. They said for the reason you just said, because you could stop them. You could be like, a wildfire is going to happen in Atlanta. Whoops, I set one, and now I made all this money. So anything that was human created or caused, you couldn't do that. But that's not to say other websites. I saw you could bet on the California wildfires last year and like how far they would spread. And that was really that's incentivizing people for arson or to, whatever. Like that's disturbing. That should be illegal. And I believe it is, but some places still allow those bets.
Wow, yeah, wow, that's just kind
Yeah.
of alarming. And one thing we want to talk about here coming up in our after with this final segment here is kind of the future of what betting on the future is going to look like here, and talking about the weather and climate. So we'll be right back here on Queen C News Plus with Pinpoint Weather University with Dr. Hallie Lieberman in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman here on Queen City News Plus, of course, with my good friend, who happens to be a colleague, meteorologist Brandon Lawson. We're talking about betting, and specifically betting on the weather here. We've got Dr. Hallie Lieberman. She wrote a fascinating article on Atmos about the climate casino and people betting on the future of our weather and the climate. So, one thing that was really interesting that you were talking about here, Dr. Lieberman, a little bit earlier was people, they really want to get into the, you want to get the latest data possible, because there's times here. One time I actually did do this on Kalshi. I was betting the high temperature in Chicago. First one, I thought they were doing the official high temperature at O'Hare. It was actually at Midway, and that little intricacy can make the difference of 1 degree.
Yeah.
And also, there can be rounding errors. And sometimes if you look at the exact METAR data, so what will happen is, one time I thought my position, I had like an 85%. I had got it was going to be at this temperature. I was in the green. And then all of a sudden, right when the METAR data comes out, they release it since about 4:30, around 5:30 or so, it flipped. And there are people who were sitting there who had who basically made 5, 6x their money here in a second just by that rounding error. My question is, what do you think the potential is for maybe the meteorologists at the various National Weather Service offices, if they can know what that high temperature data is going to be, maybe just a minute or 30 seconds before the rest of the public? Because one of my beefs here is just the potential for fraud when it comes to betting markets. And you can tell me if you agree or not. That potential also extends to weather betting as well, because it just takes that 30-second or 1 minute edge to really make all the difference when it comes to these markets.
Yeah, no, there's potential for fraud. And it's interesting that you brought up betting because a lot of the people I talked to were either meteorologists or had studied that in school. And they thought of this betting as like more skills based. They're like, oh, I wouldn't bet on sports because you can't, get all the information, but there's like a science to this. And so that was
Yeah.
interesting. And yeah, insider trading or whatever you would call it with the meteorologist having time is exactly what that gives you that edge for this weather data. And all the bettors or traders I was talking to were like, that's why they're reaching out to these people at universities and who are running these stations and going to Central Park and they were looking for that 30-second minute edge that you're speaking of. If you're working at one of these stations, or you're working in as a meteorologist, you got that edge, you can win huge, like hundreds of thousands of dollars on these bets. And yeah, so the future of it, I mean, I don't know if you're, as a meteorologist, if you have faster access, if they're going to make you sign something that says, I'm not allowed to trade on this, just like people in sports aren't allowed to bet on their team or whatever. I mean, that would not be surprising at all, especially given how big this market has become. I'm guessing you didn't have to sign anything for your job, or that wasn't an issue, but
We've had to
Other
sign
than
something. But,
contracts.
yeah, we had to sign a contract, but nothing when it came to betting
But
on
when
the
it
weather.
comes to betting, I was gonna mention. I mean, this serious than other sport. I mean, we've seen what's happened with Terry Rozier
Yeah.
and the NBA.
Scary time.
I mean, just the amount of bets that were placed on him and like
Yeah.
accused of possibly, making those bets happen or
Yep.
not happen in some aspects to benefit others. And the fines and the it's criminal. I mean, people have been arrested for it. We've seen a lot of suspensions in the NFL as well. So that is a very interesting just deal in general because, like, I mean, obviously, National Weather Service office, they have their deal, they have the weather stations and stuff, but grounding gears and different things like that could
Makes a
definitely
huge
change
difference.
the game. My next question, just kind of talking more on the lines of if people are getting good at this. Like for example, if I go in there as a meteorologist, been professional as a meteorologist for 6 years, graduated UNC Charlotte in 2019. Andrew, you've been in it for a little bit now. How long have you? How
A
long?
little bit of gray in this peach fuzz, but no, I've been working professionally now on 9 years. So it'll be 10
Right.
years in September.
So you think we'd get on there and we'd just be able to dominate? But I was on there and I was looking at certain trading deals and I was like, man, everybody's already on this temperature. Everybody's already on this low temperature
Smart
for
money.
the night. I'm like, how are people just launching towards this? Do you think people are getting pretty good at this already, Dr. Lieberman?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and people do like I saw on Reddit, like people were sharing their models and they were trying to get people to pay for them, like, not meteorologists, but just like, oh, I got the model, I got the edge, pay me $10 a month and I'll do it. So there's like a micro industry building up. But yes, and there are, meteorologists, and this was another like ethical thing. There are meteorologists who are like, I'm making more money from this. If you're good at it, then my day job. And the question they were saying is like the amount of money being poured into it, if we this into like meteorological research instead, like we could come up with better models and better science. So it's like the ethics too of like people putting this money towards, this betting as opposed to science itself. Although there is information we can glean from prediction markets. But yeah, no, it's crazy how people have become skilled at this.
People paying for models.
Still pay it. Yeah. I mean, it's wild. My final question for you here. I mean, one of the co-founders of Kalshi famously says they want to create a market for every single difference of opinion. How much bigger do you think potentially weather betting is going to get here as we wrap this up?
I mean, well, so I did this article in September and I checked, what the weather markets are now. I did it in September of last year. Now you can bet on snow. You couldn't do that before. They didn't have a lot of snow markets, like whether it's going to snow in Miami. Now you can bet on low temperatures. They've expanded the number of bets. So there's going to be like a lot more, I think. I mean, I don't know how much, rain you're getting between 1 and 2 p.m. on a Friday in Miami. I don't know if it's going to get down to that, but there is this desire to bet on everything now. Prediction markets are huge. So I see no reason why, just like with sports betting and prop betting, this won't expand in a similar way.
No, really, really, really fascinating. And I just want to say, Dr. Lehman, really appreciate the conversation we had and you taking time to speak to us today. And looking forward to what the future is going to be here with weather betting in the future. Maybe are you going to be just quickly? Are you going to bet on any weather events in the future, Dr. Lieberman?
I was tempted. I can't say no because I did bet on the Oscars. So would I bet on the weather? Maybe, but like it would be like $5. It would be low bets, but for fun.
March Madness is, we're in the mix of it now.
Yeah.
So if your bracket's not busted yet, maybe you got the good luck charm.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a sign. I don't know.
No, I love it. But that's going to do it for us here on this episode of Pinpoint Weather University. For Dr. Hallie Lieberman, I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman, my great colleague, meteorologist Brandon Lawson. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.